Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back from the air break. You're still watching Prime Live. Now, we are joined by Khalid Vawda, who will be sharing with us the powerful story of the Global Sumud Flotilla, a humanitarian mission that aimed to bring relief and raise awareness about the plight of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Now, a South African delegation, including prominent figures like Nkosi Mandla Mandela, participated in this courageous and compassionate endeavor. And we do know that he was also amongst the people that were abducted. Now, in today's conversation, we want to just get an update on exactly what's happening with regards to the Global Sumud Flotilla. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah so much for joining us, Khalid, and welcome to Prime Live.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair for having me.
Jazakallah so much for joining us. Now, we understand that the South African delegates who took part in the Global Sumud Flotilla have returned to South Africa. Can you tell us how it felt seeing them this morning?
It was quite surreal. It was obviously feelings of happiness and emotion that we got them back home and we got them back home safely. Although the 5 days that they spent in Israeli dungeons, in Israeli captivity, was harrowing, especially for their family members and for anybody who's a human being who has a heart, because you don't want to see anybody in an Israeli dungeon. The word from each of our activists has been the continued focus on the people of Gaza, has been the continued focus on the situation that the Palestinians face when they are languishing in Israeli dungeons, because the difficulties that our activists have faced, that our humanitarians have faced, they all stated unequivocally that the challenges, the difficulties they faced in their few days in prison is nothing compared to what Palestinians go through, some of whom have been in detention for more than 2 decades. We know there's children in Palestinian detention. We know there's women in Palestinian detention. We know there's elderly in Israeli detention. My apologies. So these dungeons have no rule of law. They have law means absolutely nothing to them, and they take full advantage of that. We've seen the stories of torture of Palestinian prisoners, and that should be the focus. The more than 10,000 Palestinians who are in the dungeons of the Israeli genocidal regime.
And when the South African delegates arrived at OR Tambo International Airport, I'm sure there were like many supporters and well-wishers there to welcome them home. Can you just describe to us the atmosphere and emotions that were present at the airport?
It was absolutely beautiful to see people of all walks of life, all races, all religions, all ethnicities. Everybody came out with one voice. And this is indicative of the fact that the solidarity for the cause of Palestine is growing, and it's growing rapidly. There's a few marginal voices, racist, bigoted voices in South Africa that still cling on to the days of apartheid and the so-called goodness and the good life they had under apartheid. Those are the same voices that are marginalized now. They're very few. The vast majority of South Africans are justice-loving people. They are human at heart, and they want to see justice for the people of Palestine, because the apartheid that we experienced in South Africa was absolutely horrific. There's no doubt about it. The apartheid and genocide that's being meted out to the Palestinians is 100 times worse. Our ministers who've been to the occupied West Bank, even before this genocide began, have attested to that. Nowhere in our darkest days did we have fighter jets dropping bombs over Soweto or over Alex. And nowhere did we have buildings being bombed from the sky. Nowhere did we have white phosphorus being thrown onto kids. We didn't have snipers targeting children in their heads and in their chests. We didn't have 1,000 babies. 1,000 babies under the age of 1 have been murdered by the Israeli maniacs in this current genocide. That's just one shocking statistic.
I mean, that is such an important, aspect of the conversation to mention, and just to highlight, the intensity of what's happening in Palestine. And in the same breath, can you please give us some context, behind the motivation behind the Global Sumud Flotilla?
The first flotilla, the first of the Sumud flotillas, was back in 2008, and that vessel actually made it to the shores of Gaza. The American lady, one of them who was on the boat, was actually in Tunisia with the current delegates before they set sail. And there were many interviews with her, which you can find on social media. There have been multiple attempts since then. We know the Mavi Marmara that took place in 2010, 2011. when the Israelis opened fire on the participants, and they ended up killing at least 10 participants, mainly from Turkey. There have been a few missions. We know earlier this year there was the Madeleine, which was hijacked at sea by Israel in an act of piracy, and we need to call it what it is. When you steal a vessel and abduct people and kidnap people in international waters, it is piracy, irrespective of the uniform you're wearing and irrespective of the color of your skin. So in this act of piracy, more than close on to 500 delegates from more than 50 countries took part in this from various parts of the world. This was the largest maritime mission in human history to break a siege, because the land option has been tried and it's been blocked off through Egypt and through Jordan. There is no airport in Gaza. The airport was bombed in the late 90s by Israel, so there's no airport. Nothing can be flown into Gaza. The sea is the only option, and we got so close. We got so close. You probably saw the video circulating on social media from the shores of Gaza, where they saw the last vessel coming in close a few days ago, and that was also abducted and intercepted. Mind you, this is not the only one. So today in the press conference, Mandla spoke about the fact that they're already planning flotilla number 2. They're not giving up. The mood is strong. They are even more defiant and even more determined to be able to bring this to an end, to be able to put pressure on all the authorities wherever they may be. All of the delegates, Zahira, Fatima, Zukiswa, Carol, Riaz, and Mandla all spoke with the same voice. They are all unequivocal about the fact that they would do this again and again and again until Palestine is free and until that corridor, that humanitarian corridor, is opened. Because remember, aid is being blocked from getting into Gaza. And the aid that does trickle into Gaza is being managed, and I say that in inverted commas, by the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, so-called. I call them the Gaza Dehumanization Foundation, because when they hand out food, they kill people in scenes from the Hunger Games, for anybody who's familiar with that film. So this attempt was to open a sea corridor to be able to deliver aid to the besieged people of Palestine, of Gaza specifically. And already today, we know that there was another mission that had set sail with the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. Close on to 180 delegates were intercepted. These are all doctors. These are all media personnel. These are all humanitarians from across the world. 180 of them were abducted today by Israeli pirates in international waters again, and have been taken to Israeli dungeons. So let's keep an eye on. There's a Global Sumud Flotilla, there's a Freedom Flotilla Coalition, all with the same objective.
And for those who might not be familiar, with the humanitarian need that drove people to deliver this mission for the Global Sumud Flotilla so that they can be able to deliver aid to Gaza, can you just highlight for us the humanitarian need that actually drove them out there?
There's a famine. The United Nations has said there's a famine. I think that just says everything. We knew it was coming. We saw it coming, because the thing is, Israel announced this. After the 7th of October, the resistance operations by the Mujahideen in Gaza, Israel announced that they're going to be blocking off all food, all fuel, all water, all electricity. They announced the intentions of genocide for the entire world. These weren't ordinary Israeli civilians. These were the leaders who shaped Israeli policy and Israeli government policy. It came from the top all the way down, and this is what a big part of the South African case at the ICJ was built upon, was that this was stated clearly and it was acted upon. So genocide needs to be, you need to prove the intent, which South Africa did very, very clearly and was joined by other nations at the ICJ. So the starvation became more acute. We know there was a 3-month complete blockade when trucks were stopped at Rafah. There were over 3,000 trucks at the time for a period of 3 months. Absolutely nothing was allowed into Gaza. And we know, because we're in contact with people from Gaza, we have quite a few Palestinians in South Africa, in the various cities, and they are in touch with their families trying to get anything across. The Israeli claims that the aid was being stolen by Hamas was absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish. The aid was being taken by gangs who were being given the green light by Israel. So there are criminal gangs operating in Gaza under the auspices of Israel, being given money by Israel, stealing the aid and then selling the aid at double, triple, quadruple the price back to the market, which is why you're paying up to $30 for tomatoes at one stage. $30, 600 Rand for a pack of tomatoes. That's what somebody was paying. For flour, you were looking at $1,000. It was just absolutely ridiculous. So all of these measures were meant to starve the population into submission so that the population turns on the resistance, and then Gaza becomes a subjugated people, Palestine becomes a subjugated people to serve the settler colonial interests of the demonic state of Israel.
And let's talk about the impact, that the initiatives such as the Global Sumud Flotilla has on, what's happening now in Gaza, and how can also people help to break the cycle of violence and bring a lasting peace in Gaza?
Civil society has risen up because governments have failed. This is what you're seeing with the Global Sumud Flotilla. Governments who have the authority, who have the military capacity, who have the political leverage to be able to stop wars and to be able to stop oppression of other people, have sat by and done nothing. Literally have done nothing. Others have actually supported the genocide. The United States, on the one end, claims to be a broker of peace and trying to negotiate deals between the Palestinians and between Israel. But on the other hand, it's the largest supplier of weapons and aid to Israel to supplement its genocide. The United Kingdom as well, Germany as well. And then neighboring states in the Middle East have been probably the biggest sellouts because they've sat idly by. Some of them have actually supported the genocide by providing land corridors for aid into Israel when the Red Sea was besieged by fighters from Yemen. Business has continued between some countries in the Middle East and Israel, like normal. Fuel, South Africa actually, and that brings me on to a point of action because our audience is South African. We still have a lot of work to do in South Africa. We fully commend the South African government, especially DIRCO, for getting our delegates out very quickly. But at the same time, South Africa is still supplying coal to Israel. It's the largest coal supplier to Israel. If Colombia could turn off coal immediately, we should be doing the same. In fact, we should be leading in this regard because we led the case at the ICJ and we helped to turn world opinion, global opinion against Israel, which was seen at the United Nations recently when Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to an empty hall at the General Assembly in something that was unprecedented. It's never been done in the history of the United Nations, where more than 150 delegates walked out. There were only 8 countries that stayed behind to listen to that waffle, that verbal diarrhea that came out of Benjamin Netanyahu's mouth. So South Africa has a lot of work to do. We need to expel the Israeli ambassador. We need to shut down the Israeli embassy. There needs to be a vacant sign placed outside that property that houses the Israeli embassy in Pretoria. And all of these Zionist institutions in South Africa that have ties with Israel need to be exposed because they are active and complicit in war crimes. There's South Africans that are serving in the Israeli terrorist forces right now, actively. They need to be exposed. The cases, so whoever has leverage in whichever fields that they work in from our audience, whether you're in the legal field, whether you're in the political field, within your business circles, we need to make sure that we exact this pressure on those institutions in order that this complete relationship with Israel gets cut by South Africa once and for all.
I mean, it's quite alarming, the points that you have mentioned, that in South Africa, as much as we are at the forefront of standing in solidarity with the Palestinians, we still have cases like that, like the coal issue that you've just mentioned, and, the Israel embassies that are still in South Africa. But inshallah, I do hope and pray that, this will be resolved, and inshallah, the right people who are watching right now will be able to take heed and understand the seriousness of this matter. But in a closing message, what would you like?
One more, sorry, just one more point. I think it might allude to your last question as well.
Yes.
For the public who are watching.
Yes.
You have the power about where you spend your money. Everybody right now. So the audience, I'm not going to ask people to make dua because if you're not making dua 2 years into a genocide, then we seriously need to self-inspect and look at what we're doing wrong. Dua should be a standard by us every single day in every salah for the last 2 years, if not longer. So that goes without saying. However, if we look at the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, Dua was never ever done alone. Dua and action go hand in hand. We cannot make dua and expect things to happen from everywhere else. And Allah has not taught this to us. Allah has not taught this to us. At the Battle of Badr, at the eve of the Battle of Badr, first the Muslim army prepared the platform for the Battle of Badr. They covered up the wells so that the enemy couldn't have access to water. They found strategic locations to place the army in order to corner the enemy when the day of the battle did arise. And then, after that, the Prophet ﷺ spent the night in dua. Action and dua work hand in hand. Action alone without dua means you're devoid of the help of Allah. Dua alone without action means you're following half a sunnah. Neither is going to work. We need to work towards being better believers, all of us. But in terms of our advocacy for Palestine, in terms of our responsibility, more importantly, as Muslims, we have a responsibility towards Palestine. We have a responsibility towards our brothers and sisters there because they have a right over us. They're going to claim these rights on the day of judgment if we don't fulfill these rights. And that should alarm each and every one of us. When we do not fulfill the rights of others, they are going to claim those rights from us on the day of judgment. Masjid al-Aqsa has a right over us. The settlers, the incursions into Masjid al-Aqsa are becoming regular. What are we doing about it? So, if in our communities we can mobilize, let's do that. Let's cut out all of these companies who are complicit in the genocide and who receive awards from Israel for their financial support. We shouldn't be touching any of these products. Cape Union Mart, Coca-Cola, Clover. There are so many of them here in South Africa. Start somewhere. But make sure it's a stand. Cut these out. It's not a matter of life and death. If you do not drink Coca-Cola, you're not going to die. If you don't drink water, you're going to die, which our brothers and sisters in Palestine are going through. They don't have clean water to drink. So let's revisit our perspectives and our mind frames. There's a lot we still have to do as a community here.
I mean, Jazakallah so much for joining us, Khalid. And I mean, I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that dua goes hand in hand in action, because a lot of times we have normalized, just saying, oh, let's just make dua about it. And I think we are in times where action is very, very important. And like you mentioned, it is part of the sunnah, and it's exactly how the Prophet ﷺ used to do things. So Jazakallah so much for sharing your insights and for giving us your time.
It's a pleasure. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah so much. Viewers at home, that was Khalid Vawda, and he was just giving us the update on the Global Sumud Flotilla and the South African participants that just came into South Africa this morning. But viewers at home, on that note, it's time for us to head over to a quick break. We'll see you right after this.